Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we are going to be looking at what is a presuppositional apologetic. Basically, I'm going to be outlining what I understand or what I see as the basic presuppositionalist argument that's out there, and then introducing a new series. But in this video, my main point is to present kind of the positive version of the argument and not offer too many objections. I'm going to try. It may be difficult. So, the presuppositionalist form is a dialectic form. That means it's about discussion. It's a method of discourse between two or more people holding different views on a subject. It's not necessarily one specific argument that's put out there, though they do have arguments. It is more kind of that method of discourse, that back and forth. And they'd rather have a discussion of points than present a stand-alone argument. This is actually really interesting. This is something that the ancient Greeks did a lot, so I was very curious to look into this argument. Now, what I'm going to present here is kind of the Sye-Ten-Bruggencate flowchart of how to have this discussion. You can find it on proofthatgodexists.org if you want to see it for yourself. For me, I'm going to be presenting most of it, so you probably don't need to do that. And then I'm going to kind of explain maybe some reasons why someone would accept the conclusions offered there. At the beginning, you're faced with a choice between four options. They seem to be all-inclusive options. Absolute truth exists. Absolute truth does not exist. I don't know if absolute truth exists, or I don't care if absolute truth exists. If you click I don't care that absolute truth exists, he's going to refuse to have a discussion with you. This seems to make sense because if you don't care about absolute truth, that's what he cares about, so he doesn't want to talk to you. Sends you off to a Disney website or something. I don't know if absolute truth exists. Then you're faced with the question of, is that statement true or false? Well, if it's false, it's going to send you back because you didn't believe what you actually clicked on. And if it's true, then, well, you seem to believe that absolute truth exists because you think that statement is true. So it's going to return you back to the original question either way. If you say absolute truth does not exist, you're faced with a true or false statement once again, and either of these answers is going to return you the original question. If you think that absolute truth does not exist is false, you shouldn't have clicked on it. And if you think that it is true, then you think something is true or something is absolutely true. So either answer will return you the original question. Finally, we get to absolute truth exists, kind of the answer he wants to direct us towards. So then we're faced with more of a real choice. Either I know something to be true, or I don't know anything to be true. If you go to, I don't know anything to be true, it kind of uses the same trick he used earlier, which is, well, either that's true or false, and either answer is going to return you the original question. Because if you think it's false, then clearly you shouldn't have clicked on it, and if you think it's true, then you seem to know something to be true. If you know something to be true, you're faced with the question of, does logic exist or does logic not exist? If you go with that logic does not exist, well, is that implied by logic or is it implied by something arbitrary that's not logic? Well, if it's implied by logic, it seems logic exists, and if it's implied by something arbitrary, then we don't care and we're not really going to have a discussion with you, or it could be that something arbitrary could also imply that logic does exist. So there's no way for you to distinguish between those two things. And either answer is going to return you to the original question. Logic exists. Either logic changes or it doesn't change. If you click logic changes, it'll return you to the other answer that logic does not change because logic could keep changing to the point where it doesn't change. If logic does not change, you're faced with the following choice. Logic is material or logic is immaterial. I'm running out of room, so we're going to go up here. If you say logic is material, you can end up with matter changes or matter does not change. If matter changes, he's going to return you the original question because if logic doesn't change and logic is material and material or matter changes, then logic clearly isn't material. And if matter does not change, he's going to refuse to debate you because he's going to claim that you're just crazy, clearly matter changes. Logic is immaterial. You either say logic is universal or logic is person-relative. If you say logic is person-relative, he's going to return you the other answer, kind of with the same bit that he used earlier, saying that, well, if it's person-relative, it could change, or my person-relative version of it is that it is universal, so it wouldn't really matter. Logic is universal, therefore God exists. Now, there were some things that you would probably want to object to in that whole flowchart. But for the most part, we haven't gotten to any too ridiculous conclusions up to this point. We've gotten, there is knowledge, there is truth, and there's universal, immaterial, unchanging logic. Now, as a skeptic, I'm going to want to object earlier than this. But for most people, or the common kind of pre-philosophical conceptions of the world, this seems to be a pretty sensible conclusion. To get from this to God exists seems to be a little worrying. Let's check out how he does this with some more classic arguments in premise conclusion form. So, either we have knowledge or we don't. The only way to gain knowledge is to be omnipotent, or to be told something from one that is omnipotent. We cannot not have knowledge. We have knowledge. Therefore, we gained that knowledge from something omnipotent, God. Therefore, God exists and is omnipotent. Truth is not solely something physical. The only way to have access to something that's not solely physical is to have access to someone that transcends the physical world. We have access to truth. Therefore, we have access to someone that transcends the physical world, God. Once again, not only are we proving God, we're kind of proving God's properties, which is something that a lot of other arguments for God don't do. In order to know something, universal, immaterial, and unchanging, we must have access to something that's universal, immaterial, and unchanging. Logic is universal, immaterial, and unchanging. We have access to logic. Therefore, we have access to someone that's immaterial, universal, and unchanging, God. We've just proved a lot of properties of God and shown that God exists. Very interesting series of arguments. According to Seitan Rubenkate, the fool has said in his heart that there is no God. Well, in that case, let me introduce my next series, Better a Witty Fool. This is going to be a critique of presuppositionalism. What I'm going to do here is take a lot of old philosophical positions, philosophers that never got to engage with presuppositionalism, and see where they would fall on that kind of flowchart, and how they would defend a position that he might believe is undefensible. We're going to have William James versus presuppositionalism, Pyrrho, Thomas Kuhn, Agrippa, Bertrand Russell, Saul Kripke, Quine and Goodman, Aristotle, Lewis Carroll, and then, at the end of the series, I will get in on the fun and provide the rest of the objections that need to be made. It's an interesting argument that asks us some interesting questions, but I don't think it's going to be an argument that can stand up under the weight of kind of the history of philosophy and a lot of positions that have been proposed and substantiated in interesting ways. Watch this video and more at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.